Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome you to the third panel, Saving the Best for Last. I welcome you as a special envoy for Holocaust Interfaith Dialogue and freedom of religion here at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic. There is an old Chinese proverb: the best kind of closed door is the one you can leave unlocked. There are many leaders that try to convince people to lock the door, but that's not our way. That's why we entitled our panel "The Contribution of Faith Communities to Building Trust in Diplomatic Relations." And we will have here representatives from United Nations, Egypt, and Israel. The religion in most parts of the world co-shapes society, and diplomacy cannot be carried out effectively without good understanding, knowledge, and consideration of the local religious situations. At a time of a growing power of the totalitarian ideologies and disruptive technologies, interfaith dialogue can become one of the driving forces for solution of many current problems. Today's diplomacy can no longer solve international problems at the political, economic, or diplomatic level alone. Far more than in the past, the diplomacy has to deal with international problems in a holistic approach and seek to prevent conflicts and resolve post-conflict situations through interfaith dialogue among local religious leaders, not necessary officials. All three main religions incorporate ideals of peace, reconciliation, and justice, and such ideals can be good inspiration for governments and international organizations. In addition, those religions are and can be much more one of the important sources of resilience. Influence of religion is growing, and not only in society but also in the diplomatic world. Before we will discuss the relationship between religion and diplomacy, I'm honored to introduce our high respected speakers on the panel, except of Dr. Sarah Wolf, the director of the Center for European Research, who cannot be with us from the serious family reasons. We wish all the best. We cannot have a more suitable speaker with great diplomatic experience for our panel than our first panelist, His Excellency Miguel Angel Moratinos. I would like to welcome him here. I will, before I give him the word, I will introduce His Excellency, and I will introduce also our two other panelists. His Excellency Miguel Moratinos is the United Nations Under-Secretary General holding the post of High Representative for the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations. In addition to his other responsibilities, His Excellency Moratinos was designated by the United Nations Secretary General as the UN focal point to monitor anti-Semitism. Mr. Moratinos served as the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Spain, and during his acting as a foreign minister, Spain had the presidency of the UN Security Council in 2004, held the chairmanships in office of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the Council of Europe, and Council of the European Union. Second distinguished panelist is Dr. George Fahimi. Please let's welcome him at the panel, who is a researcher fellow at the Middle East Direction Program of the Robert Schuman Center for Advanced Studies at the European University Institute in Fiesole, Italy. Previously, Dr. Fahimi was a non-resident scholar at the Carnegie Middle East Center in Beirut, Lebanon, and his research focuses on religious actors in democratic transition in the Middle East, the interplay between state and religion in Egypt and Tunisia, and religious minorities and citizenship in Egypt and in Syria. And our third panelist will be Dr. Samuel Muli Pelek, the director of the International School at Oranim College. Dr. Pelek is a political sociologist trained in the fields of comparative politics and international relations. His areas of expertise are peace building, reconciliation and social sustainability, justice, human rights, and conflict resolution. In the US, Dr. Pelek led a team of experts in a Columbia University project which brought together Jews and Arab from community leaders in an effort to establish a shared identity, and has worked with the Martin Luther King Foundation on social justice projects. Dr. Pelek has a great political experience as a negotiator and peacemaker. In addition to his academic career, his main focus is on interculture and interfaith dialogue in deeply divided societies. And now is the time already. Now I would like to invite His Excellency Miguel Moratinos to be the first speaker and open with his sense of humor, the real dialogue, not like we can see in other conferences, the parallel monologues. So please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to the audience. To be still, after a long day, to listen to somebody to take the floor has been extremely enlightening session this morning and this afternoon. So I hope that will not deceive you, disappoint you. So let us start by expressing my thanks, my gratitude to, of course, the Foreign Minister of Czech Republic, and of course my dear friend Robert Rehak, that have the courage, I will say, and I think the vision for having this annual conference about interfaith, intercultural dialogue. It's not normal. I've been foreign minister myself, and I have some self-criticism. Even in my time, even I was very much involved in this issue, I never thought to introduce religion and cultural affairs as a part of our normal diplomatic activities. So I commend, the Czech diplomacy for having this kind of initiative, extremely timely, extremely needed, extremely urgent in order to really contribute to peace and better future for all of us. I have also to commend my dear friend, Ambassador Egemen Bajic. I think he's the one who convinced me, I'm sorry to say. We are all friends. We've been working together for many years. He was asking me to come to see him in Prague, and that's, well, what a better occasion to have these two opportunities to meet an old friend and to have the opportunity to participate in this important gathering. Let's start it by saying, I'm not a religious leader. You can understand that. I'm not an NGO activist. Of course not. I've been a former diplomat, I'm a politician, and I'm now in my new responsibility of High Representative of the United Nations. I'm half and half. I'm part of politician, part of diplomat. So my contribution, my friend, if we are in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Czech Republic, is a political contribution. I do respect a lot of religious leaders that are participating here, faith-based organization, academician, media, all of us are essential, indispensable. But don't forget, my dear friend, also politicians. We need also politicians. Don't think that politicians have to be put aside and then we will solve. And we need all of you. Because without all of you, we will not be able to have a right and comprehensive response to the challenge of today. So, I know I have not too much time, but as there is one panelist missing, I will grab part of his time. I remember Simon Perez one day telling me, I was invited to a big conference in Los Angeles and say, well, no, I cannot go. Yes, we bought for you a first-class ticket. We put you in the 5-star hotel. And then when they started the conference, say, your prime minister, you have 1 minute. You say, why? 1 minute and you pay me a first-class ticket, a 5-star hotel room, and you only give me 1 minute. So I have to speak a little longer. So diplomacy and religion is a long story together. It's as long as humanity. Never religion, diplomacy has been excluded itself because power, authority, influence was interrelated at the beginning of our humanity with diplomacy. I mean, you go to the Assyrian, you go to the Egyptian time, to the Greek time, to the Roman time, you will see how religion was affecting the beginning of diplomacy in our times, in our history. It is true that I will say some highlights. Well, I don't want to recuperate or to recall the gloomy period of the Crusades, both sides. But what does religion and diplomacy and war and peace? So we were together, unfortunately, with not so good result on the ground. And then we got to this 16th, 17th century in Europe, because now we are much more concerned about what is going on in the East. But we have, as Westerners, to look at ourselves, what we had been through ourselves in our European history. What was this war of religion in our territories? How was, this internal battle in France between Catholics, Huguenots, and Protestants? I even use the Traité de Saint-Germain-de-Haye. It's a book called Art of Negotiation. At the beginning, 1517, it was before St. Bartholomew Night. But that was the negotiation. It's a fantastic book by a Belgian diplomat, describe how you negotiate. So I learn negotiation. I teach my students in Sciences Po through a religious component. The right of conscience, the right of cult, of Protestant, Huguenot in France. And how? Well, was 1570, they reached an agreement, but unfortunately in 1572, there was the St. Bartholomew Night, 30,000 people killed in Paris, 70,000 people killed in France. We forgot about that, thanks God. But that was religion, politics, and diplomacy. And then we come, the revolution, French Revolution, and then we went to the secular state, and where we are now. I was very much interested by my compatriot Maria del Mar when he, as a sociologist, said, well, societies today are complex, and they are different components of our society. And societies today, in the Western world, they are under this challenge of the rupture of the social contract. We are very much concerned about how to rebuild trust, as you say in all your panelists, and how to create a new social contract. Well, if you want to create a social contract, it's not only through the traditional political parties that represent yourself in the parliament, and they can make a final deal, a final program, a final political proposal. You have to introduce, if you want to have a sound and sustainable social contract, you have to introduce all the actors that they are influencing, the living together, the harmony in society, and they can really have a better situation. For that is what we are about. And I think I again congratulate you, Robert, because you have, from the morning till now, proposed to discuss how these social contracts, how this trust is built within our societies, in between the different communities, the different nations, the different states, the different actors in today's world. I listened with a lot of interest some of the intervention this morning. The French, Yves Leroy, very interesting. They say we have not to confuse culture and religion. I agree, Mr. Leroy. I will come back immediately. Our friend David Rosen say, well, there is different kind of, not all religions are the same. Don't get into this identity and religion. I mean, I know how to read. I know that identity means something. I know that culture means something. I know that religion means something. Yeah, I know that civilization means a different thing. With all my respect to the two great academicians or thinkers, okay, it's good. And I learned that we have to be serious when we talk about religion, not to confuse about culture, or not to confuse about identity, and not to confuse about civilization. But it doesn't mean as a politician, is what I am, that I have to take into account all these elements because they are interacting together. I mean, even a religious leader have to understand that religion is affecting their own identity, affecting the identity of the group of friends and faith believers, and that they create a kind of culture, and then the culture creates a kind of civilization. So why we are afraid of having a comprehensive approach to this issue? I need, of course, that religious leader at the Mufti of Malmo very brilliantly expressed, they have to be independent, of course. And I need that, well, the cultural element will not hide the other interests, of course. But if I want to really grasp and capture the problems and the crisis elements of our society, I have to play with all of these issues together. I have another element before I go to the great challenge about diplomacy today and religious and cultural dialogue or vector. There are two concepts that have to be revisited. One is multiculturalism and cultural approach. There is some countries, one important country, that they don't like the word multiculturalism. They say, no, Mr. Moratino, talk about cultural diversity, but please don't use multiculturalism, but means, you know, it's a kind of relativism of culture. And then I have some question mark about my friend Leroy. He said, you have the freedom of religion, but you don't have the freedom of culture. Well, that is an academic discussion, no? I mean, if I want to be, and I go to Africa, and I become love of Africa, I will adopt the African culture. If I go to India, to Bangladesh, and I have the right, maybe no, I'm not the freedom, I have the right to adopt another culture by my own decision. So I think it's a bit academic, presentation. Secondly, the word minorities, that is very much loved about, this kind of debate. Minorities is, yes, we have to protect minorities, they say, because they are under threat, under danger. But the Pope Francis and King Mohammed VI of Morocco, when the Pope visited, Morocco 2 years ago, they went a step further. What we have to defend is citizenship. We don't need a minority to put aside. We give them away. We give you this part of the building for you. No. You are Muslim, you have all rights within the, of course, secular constitution. You have the right to express and to divide and to defend your belief and your credo. Whatever you are, wherever you are, in your country, in any place on the world. So let's fight not to defend and protect minority, but to give rights to the people. And then, secondly, we have this confusion about that has been very much in the debate in Europe, about the freedom of expression and freedom of belief on religions, or exerting your right to go to church and spread your sensitivity, etc. But Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, one is for freedom of expression, other is for the freedom of religion and conscience. I will ask you, what do you prefer, Egemen? You prefer 18 or 19, or both? One is more important than the other? It seems in Europe that one is more important than the other, freedom of expression. I defend freedom of expression myself, but I put on the same level my freedom of conscience and religion. So we have to give one a second-class support, and another the full-fledged support. There are politicians in Europe, they say, no, they defend the freedom of expression. The other one, everybody have to accept my criticism because, well, it's different. No, the same level, interacting together. So that also have to be reviewed. So with all that, my friend, my own experience when I assumed the responsibility of the United Nations Alliance Organization, I put all the elements together. So what I'm trying to do, or what the United Nations Alliance Organization is trying to do, it has been discussed during the day. First, dialogue between religion and culture. But what kind of dialogue? Any kind of dialogue is welcome. Monsignor Thoron, who was former Secretary of State of the Holy See, a great personality, Your Eminence, was a great friend of mine. He said that there are 3 categories for dialogue. The dialogue has to be open, has to be sincere, and well-intentioned. If that is the case, it's a good start. But how many conferences of religious leaders or even politicians that, of course, dialogue is the first step. But after dialogue, what? We listen to the Mufti, and they say, well, it's a good, nice, good. We listen to rabbis, yes, it's very good. We listen to Catholic representatives, it's very good. And they say, we agree. And then they go out, not them, but the people of their constituency, and they don't understand each other. So what is the result of dialogue? It's okay. It's the first step. It's condition sine qua non. but it's not enough. That is what the alliance comes. It's not a dialogue of culture or civilization. It's an alliance, not a military alliance. Alliance is a beautiful word. It's to be together for a common objective. So dialogue. Second, prevention, diplomacy. The alliance, what it's doing, is a preventing diplomacy. It's working with the youth, with education, with the media, with the role of women, with the problem of refugees and migrants. That is to prevent and prepare the society for the future. And thirdly, that's what is in the heart of all today's discussion, is mediation, is negotiation. Diplomacy, my friend, they described me when I was young student, was 3 dimensions. It was to represent our people, our country, our entity, our organization. Number 2 is to inform, information, you inform, you make reports. And third, negotiation. Negotiation is the real heart of diplomacy. And what we have to acknowledge, that the cultural and religious elements were out of the picture. As you say, Robert, I discovered myself. And I will tell you a small anecdote that brought to me the reason I put mediation role of cultural and religious element in the main action of the United Nations Alliance of Civilization. I was EU special envoy to the Middle East. I went to the United States and the so-called Camp David II. I don't know if Mr. Rosen is listening to me, probably not, but he will like that because I'm going to comment his word of this morning. And I met President Arafat. I was the first personality to meet him in St. Andrews Airport, just half an hour after the failure of the negotiation. Why they failed? Well, everybody say Arafat. Arafat was the one to blame. No, it was not Arafat to blame. It was the reason why Arafat will not accept what was the proposal. And what was the proposal was the future of Jerusalem. And how was the future of Jerusalem being negotiated without a single, that's David Rosen said, and I agree with him, consultation, requirements, advice, help. And so Arafat said, I have now to sign that the Israeli flag is going to be put in the Haram al-Sharif? Who I am to decide for the future of the holy places in Jerusalem? I cannot do that. So that moment came to my mind, and when I became High Representative for the United Nations Alliance Civilization, I say, these religious, cultural issues have to be included in our negotiation. And that you go to the Security Council. Go to the agenda to Security Council, Ambassador. From Nigeria, you are quite aware. And you go one issue after one issue. And 99% or 95% have a religious component from the origin of the crisis, during the crisis, or post-crisis. It means that it's only a religion problem? No. But you have to address the religious dimension of the issue. So that is when I differ with our friend David Rosen. He said the Abraham agreement are extremely good. And I said, yes, of course. It's a good, I'm not against. On the contrary, I work for the normalization between Israel and Palestine and the Arab world. But don't fall in the same trap. Not because they called them Abraham, that if you don't tackle the political or the territorial issue, you will solve the problem. So don't reverse the agenda. We, diplomats, we had been during the last century neglecting the religious and cultural affairs in our negotiation. Now that we try to put them on the agenda, don't get confused that only the religious leader can solve the problem. And I have another examples. Sometimes religious leaders, they want to be political figures. Yes, I finish. Political figures. And they want to replace us work as politicians. Doesn't work. It doesn't work, my dear. We need you to create the atmosphere, to pass the messages, to influence your communities, to have the interaction among ourselves. But don't think that you are going to solve the political, in a large sense, of the equation. And sometimes they try to do so. Well, we are helping now, there are the Azerbaijani, Armenians, we try to help them to meet. That's extremely good, it has been a good step, but at the end of the day, we have to organize events like the ones you have organized, my friend, where you have politicians, you have religious leaders, you have grassroots, representative, you have the main actors working together. And the Mufti of Malmo say we have to be independent. Absolutely. But at the end of the day, we have to really, each of us, to fulfill our main responsibility. I'm not able to convey the spiritual religious message as a mufti or as an archbishop or as a priest, but I know how to negotiate because it's what I've been told. And so for that reason, the United Nations Allows Civilization is creating with Turkey a center of cultural and religious center to negotiate and mediate. And we are going to open, inshallah, hopefully next year in Istanbul. Because we have to create expertise. Women mediators, we are working already with women mediators in the Sahel, Ambassador. We have our group of people teaching how to negotiate in Mali and Central Africa Republic. And there are people and local leaders, local religious leaders working together because they are much more efficient than the people who are parachuted from New York and we don't know anything about how to handle on the ground the situation. So, my friend, like that I will finish. Let's understand that we are living in a complex society. And so we need everybody on board. It's finished the time that diplomats, so-called, or politicians, so-called, or religions, so-called, they try to work by their own. Today we have a responsibility to work all together. Each of us, with this, as Monsignor Toron was saying, this spirit to be open, to be sincere, and to be well-intentioned. That's the only way we can achieve a result in the future. So the challenge for the future is not between religious leaders, ourselves, about who is the one who is going to be more protagonistic than the other. No. The challenge of today is where this humanity is going. How we are going to defend our own identity, and I use the word identity, our human identity and dignity in favor of our future. Because sapiens is in danger. It's not because I read 1 year ago the Israeli politologist Yuval Hariri. It's because you have to acknowledge that today either you don't revolt yourself or you are going to be becoming a kind of robot where all this discussion we have today here has no sense. So if we want to really be able to survive this challenge, the spiritual element, the religious element, the cultural element, the identity element, have to be preserved and protected. And that is the main task of the United Nations Alliance of Civilization. Yes, we have to save the planet, and in Glasgow they will say tomorrow, hopefully, that we have made a big step forward. But here in Prague, we have decided to save humanity. And to save humanity, talking about ourselves with the difference of all groups, cultural, religious, social. That is what we have to save. This planet, but also to save ourselves as human beings. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We lost just one panelist. No, I'm joking. So the second panelist is Dr. George Fahimi. And Dr. George Fahimi, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Robert. It's
Ahlan wa sahlan.
Ahlan bik, Robert. Thanks. It's a great pleasure to be with all of you, even on Zoom. Hope next time I'll be in Prague. I would like to focus in my speech on the experience of the dialogue between Al-Azhar and the Vatican. And me, as an Egyptian who lives between Egypt and Italy, I thought working on this issue is like my destiny, because when I'm in Italy, I can talk to the people from the Vatican side. When I'm in Cairo, I can talk to the people from an Azhar side. So that made my life much easier when I worked on this research. Just to start, the rapprochement between Azhar and the Vatican, which started in 2016, to me, that came as maybe the only piece of positive news during this year. Like if you would listen to the news, 2014, 15, 16, most of the news will be about terrorism, ISIS, refugees crisis. And then came the decision of Pope Francis to visit Egypt, and the photos of Pope Francis meeting Sheikh Ahmed al-Tayyib, the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar. It seemed as the only positive news in this period. And it had a huge impact. And that was one of the reasons why I thought like it's important to look at this, to look at something positive, not only to do research on radicalization and violence and a lot of maybe not very positive topics. Looking at this rapprochement, I would like to speak about the challenges and how to address them. And if we talk about the challenges, I think we can think about three main challenges. The first is that it seemed that this dialogue is a dialogue between two men and not two institutions. So it was mostly relying on the personalities of Pope Francis and of Sheikh Ahmed al-Tayyib, not necessarily on the two institutions, Al-Azhar and the Vatican. And when talking to people who were part of these initiatives and of this dialogue, they told me, I mean, in our interviews, that when Pope Francis decided that he would like to visit Cairo and to visit Sheikh Ahmed al-Tayyib, there was a lot of resistance from those bishops engaged in the interreligious dialogue. And the resistance was not against the visit itself, but that they thought that, no, we have to wait until we have something from Al-Azhar on the theological level, and then the visit could come as a kind of to celebrate this. And they thought that if the Pope would visit now, that would make our theological dialogue less useful. But then Pope Francis, he decided that, no, I would like to go for this visit. And I think he was right on this, that the image in this moment was important and the visit itself is important. So from Al-Azhar side as well, Ahmed al-Tayyib, he is the head of a large institution with different religious groups within the institutions. Some of them are more open, some of them are less open. You have Salafi groups, groups affiliated to the Muslim Brotherhood. So he cannot, it's difficult for Ahmed al-Tayyib to claim that he's representing all the different groups within Al-Azhar Institute. So that's the first challenge, that this seems to be an important, great initiative, but only relying on these two men. And if one of them would disappear, then we are not sure that this path will continue. The second challenge relates to the asymmetries between the two institutions, between the Vatican and Al-Azhar. Asymmetries on the political level and on the religious level. So on the political level, we're talking about a state, the Vatican, while Al-Azhar is a religious institution operating within a state. Ahmed al-Tayyib is a state employee, unlike Pope Francis. And again, in one of my interviews, one of the member of the dialogue between the two institutions, he told me that you would think that all our problems are theological. No, most of our problems are actually related to protocols and how to handle things. And he gave me one example. He told me when Ahmed al-Tayyib was planning his visit to the Vatican, he was told that he will first meet with Bishop Turin, and then he would take him to Pope Francis. And Ahmed al-Tayyib was like, but why? If Pope Francis would come to the Azhar, I would meet him immediately. Why should I stop at someone else's office and then he will take me to him? So all this kind of complicated problems relates to the Vatican as a state with a very strict rules with regard to the protocol, while Azhar is not on the same level. Of course, due to Pope Francis, many of these strict rules were kind of ignored to make things easier. But these asymmetries are also on the religious level. So while Pope Francis could claim to represent all the Catholics in the world, this is not the case for Ahmed al-Tayyib. He cannot claim to represent all Muslims in all the world. He cannot even claim to represent all Muslims in Egypt. So that created also a challenge, even if in the document on the human fraternity, Ahmed al-Tayyib signed on behalf of the East. It's not clear that this is how reliable is this. And then the third challenge, which was also raised by His Excellency Mr. Miguel, is that so what next? We had an amazing mutual visits in the Vatican, in Cairo. We had the document on human fraternity, but then what should come next? How to translate this into actions? And again, in one of my interviews, I asked this question, and I was told by the person that looked for us, the aim is the photo, that these two men are shaking hands together. The rest is up to the politicians, to the diplomats, to the civil society. We don't have a plan. He said, like, this is our plan, that we just try to pave the way, kind of relax the tensions, and then it's not up to us to come with an action plan. I think these are three main challenges that are facing this important and I think very positive initiative of rapprochement between Ahmed al-Tayyib and Pope Francis. Now, if I come to the second part of my presentation, which is how to address these challenges, I think there is a need to work on two levels, horizontally and vertically. On the one hand, these amazing meetings and amazing declarations, photos, if it will be translated on the ground, then it needs to talk to grassroots movements, Muslim, Christian, civil society organization operating on the ground. If I think about Egypt, for example, civil society in Egypt is the majority of civil society organizations are religious organizations. They are by far the most powerful. They have the most resources. They are well connected to the street. They are well connected to the people because they offer mainly welfare support and assistance in poor areas. So I think one main tool to turn this initiative into something on the ground is to engage these grassroots movements. It should not stay at the level of on the top level of the Pope Francis and Ahmed al-Tayyib. It should not stay in those like closed room meetings in Abu Dhabi or in Cairo or in the Vatican. It needs to find a way to engage those grassroots groups. These grassroots groups, and here I'm talking about Egypt, first, they're operating on the ground. Second, they have the legitimacy because people look at them as groups or organizations who care about them, who are in daily touch with them. So if they bring this discourse to the people, it will be much easier to accept it. The discourse on tolerance, on the relation between different Muslims and Christians, that would make this process much easier and more effective. The second level, and here it would build on the ideas that was discussed in the first speech and also on what Robert mentioned about the role of diplomats and the role of politicians. And again, I'm talking about the case of Egypt. If we think about changes on the level of Christian-Muslim relations, it's not about discourse. Discourse is amazing. It's about rules. It's about laws. It's about strategies. If you are to solve these problems, words are very positive step. However, if these words are not translated into laws, then we are at the dead end. And I think the same when we talk on the regional level, on the relation between Europe and the Middle East. And here comes the role of diplomats. If this initiative is not translated into steps, diplomatic steps, to tackle the differences, the problems between the two shores of the Mediterranean, then again, there is a problem. So there is a need to take this initiative to the level of diplomacy, to the level of politics. This declaration, the Declaration on Human Fraternity, if it's not translated into strategies, decisions, laws, then it will just fade away. So I think once we work on this two levels, on the diplomatic political level and on the civil society grassroots level, we will end up by having a plan of action, which is again one main challenge to this initiative. Once we are already talking to diplomats, politicians, and once we are already engaging grassroots groups, we will end up automatically talking about actions, about things on the ground that will be achieved. Let me just end this by saying, many of us, we talk about how diplomats need to engage religious leaders, and I think that's rightly so. But for this initiative between Pope Francis and Sheikh Ahmed, they need the diplomats. They need to keep their initiative alive. So they need the help of the diplomats. So it's a mutually beneficial relation. Diplomats, they need to bring religious leaders, but also religious leaders, they need diplomats in order to keep their work alive. Otherwise, people will think, okay, that was just an amazing moment, but then we are back to the daily problems we are facing. I will stop here, and I will be happy to discuss more points in the discussion.
Shukran jazilan to Dr. George Fahimi. And now I would like to ask our third and last panelist, Dr. Samuel Pelek, Muli Pelek. Baruch haba, the best regards to Israel.
Thank you. Moving from Egypt to Israel, so natural, so smooth. That's fine. What a pleasure and an honor to be a part of this panel today. And I want to mention that alongside my theoretical interest in the topic, my research, my teaching, and my writing, my practical experience in diplomacy really pertains to track 2 diplomacy, behind the scenes diplomacy, mainly focusing on the multilateral talks after the Oslo agreements and around the Geneva Accords. And I had the honor and the pleasure to work together with Yossi Beilin, a close friend of mine and one of the major figures in Israeli diplomacy. And of course, one of the main initiator of the Oslo agreements. And having said that, I'd like to present my PowerPoint presentation. Hopefully, Robert, everything works fine with the technology. Okay, so this is what I want to talk about it. The relationship between religion and diplomacy, and why, according to my understanding, the two formerly antagonists became closer together, or the relationship is much more relevant in the last 2 decades, or the 3 decades since the collapse of the Soviet Union. And I want to start, my first half of the presentation is going to be focused on context, framework, or diagnosis, and the latter half on text, content, and prognosis. Now that we hopefully understand better the situation, what should we do about it? And the context, the framework, I think is very, very important because we have a new kind of politics. And a new kind of security, which is called in the literature the move, a transition from national security to human security, with all the application and all the ramification of it. In the 60s, realpolitik or political realism was the dominant theory or axis in the field. And my field is a combination of political science and international relations. So I remember when I was a student, they used to talk about governments vying for ascendancy on the international arena. And most theorists related to governments of the countries as black boxes or as billiard balls, and the internal composition of each actor was really irrelevant or insignificant. I think that has changed tremendously during the last 2 or 3 decades. And religious affairs, sensitivities, actors really came to the fore in order to explicate and illuminate motivations for many activities, but mainly conflicts. Again, the issues that were mentioned here before, the issues of identity, of sense of belonging, of sense of purpose. And they took root in what is called in the literature identity groups. And one of the leading motivation or the leading source of people coming together, congregate and staying together was religion. And this is very important context to understand. And this table, I think, is illuminating. This is from Reverend and Mahoney Norris' book, a very important book, which is called Security in Borderless World. And this is from 2016. And I want you to take special notice of the third, the fourth, and the sixth row. The third row really stating the primary threats that are understood through the previous perspective and the current perspective. And look at the problems that catch the attention of the global agenda. So it's disease and poverty and crime, all those cross-border dilemmas. And we just think of the issues of climate change, of COVID, of terrorism, from yesterday's and today's and sadly tomorrow's headlines, to really understand how the international relations content and significance has changed. And the same with the origins of threats. Non-state actors came to the fore, transnational issues came to the fore. And look at the sixth row, bases. As opposed to national interests, universal human needs and values are now I think, the most accessible perspective to understand what's going on the world stage. And the same distinction holds for all the other matters here. So this is the launching pad, the jumping board to understand the prognosis that will follow. So here are the main characteristics or features of the new wars or the new security or the new global affairs. Well, they are verticals rather than horizontal. They take place within each territorial entity and not necessarily between two vying armies that try to cross borders into the territory of your neighbors. No formal rules or regulations, as we used to have in previous centuries when leaders or military chiefs set some rules as to how the war are gonna be handled. No regular forces, but we have networks of various non-state actors, as we witnessed in recent months and years. The strategy of collision, of confrontation, is really attrition and not decisive battles to eliminate the other. And here again, the most important thing, issues of identity and belonging rather than political interests. Violence mainly towards civilians and not vis-a-vis the other warriors and combatants. And this is an important issue as well. the sponsoring comes from pillages and looting rather than taxation. So government or nation states really are not in the focal point of conflicts around the world. It's not decisive, it's not determined, it's a transition phase. But this really points the highlight into not only the new kind of conflicts, but also the new kind of actors, of agents, of players who become relevant. And we talked about, or the previous speakers talked about dialogues, and I want to mention, since this is one of the major focal points of my work and of my research, from my perspective, from my understanding, I want to really emphasize, because the word dialogue is being used many times in many channels of communication, and many times I think it is not expressed, or it is not well intended, because there is somewhat misinterpretation of the word. So I just want to explain what I mean by dialogue, and let me start by elimination. What is not dialogue? And these are the symbols and signs and features of many other discussions, including negotiation. I see striking dissimilarity between negotiation and dialogue. And I'm going to relate to this later, but unlike what Mr. Moratinos say, I don't think dialogue is the first step. I think it's an ongoing step, which starts after the first step, which is dialogue, which is negotiation. So these are, as I encountered and witnessed during many rounds of discussions and talks and rounds of negotiation, these were the main features of the encounter. In contrast, these are the features and characteristics of dialogue, as I understand them. Tolerance, dignity, inclusion, open discourse, values, norms, new social reality. And in my book, this is really the job description of a good clergy, of responsible religious leaders. And this characteristics is really what brings religious leaders, responsible religious leaders, together with the art of diplomacy. This is what characterizes them, what enables them to become good, influential, responsible mediators, third-siders. All those characteristics that are in the heart, at the heart of the dialogue, responsible religious leaders represent, as I understand this. So, here are again some of the characteristics that I think bring religious leaders, responsible religious leaders, as I define them, and good mediators of third-siders. Again, as I understand this, as I see it, as I encountered this in my previous experience in the field, and I did some work not only between Israelis and Palestinians, but in other places, in Cyprus and in Tanzania and in other deeply divided societies, and I noticed more or less the same characteristics. This cross-border affinity, this like-mindedness of religious people, regardless of what religion they come from. They understand each other, people of faith. This is a good quality to manage conflicts. Identity is really, as I understand it, at the heart of modern day conflicts. And again, religion is one of the most prominent focal points, one of the most prominent hubs of collective identity that supplies sense of purpose and sense of belonging to many people. If mediators arrive to the arena, to a certain place where conflict is waged, equipped and armed with this understanding, this really promotes the discussion in a very meaningful way. Now, I want to say something about the issue of the politicization of religion. because this description that I'm giving now does not represent all of the religious representatives who arrive at the scene of a conflict. I believe, from my research and from my practical experience, that what separates between pious religious leaders and the militant messianic ones is this element, this orientation, or this approach of the politicization of religion. They're trying to utilize, for a lack of a better word, or take advantage of religion to achieve political goals and political agendas and political interests, which I think distract from their religion background and their religion capabilities. And this is where we have to draw the line, because I saw many militant, many violent religious people who claim to be acting or operating in the name of religious values. And this was an enigma to me. And then when I really analyzed the situation well, I noticed that their political agenda precedes their religious and spiritual agenda. And if religious people are to become good, honest, responsible, and reliable diplomats and mediators, they should, I think, minimize or get rid of this element of the politicization of religion, which gets me to the next point, which is also very important in my eyes. And this is the hidden or intangible dimensions of conflict. And these are the spiritual, the religious, the emotional, the cultural, the sentimental, and the communicational. From my experience, when they used to put together a delegation for negotiation, they always took the strategic people, the political people, the military people, the economic people. They constantly deserted or left behind the religious experts. And here I side with my friend Rabbi Rosen. Absolutely. They left out the culturalist, the communicational expert, and so on and so forth, because they thought they are marginal, they are secondary. They're not the major figures around the negotiation table. I think that's a grave mistake, because especially in today's new kind of conflicts and new kinds of security, these are the most important people, because it's, again, the intangible dimensions of conflict. It's what keeps the conflict alive. And if we keep ignoring them, and if we don't bring the right people to the negotiation table, the right background and the sensitivities, we'll keep running into a brick wall. And another important distinction, I think, is the one between peace building and peacemaking. And this is from my colleagues, my English colleagues, Ramsbottom and Woodhouse and Mile. And I think that's a very helpful distinction. Peacemaking is done, it has to be done before the peace building stage. Peacemaking is really trying to patch things up after a conflict. And this is really more a symptom-like endeavor. And this is where negotiation is taking place. And in negotiation, the main thrust, the main endeavor is to try to convince the other to see things as you see them. And this is not the right mindset for peace building. Peace building is where dialogue steps in. And peace building, I think, can happen truly and genuinely only after peacemaking and negotiation has taken place. Why? Because peacemaking is putting aside the differences as they express themselves in the symptom side. And all those arrangements are on the surface. But if you really want to deal with the roots of the problem, in order for the conflict not to recur, you need to go deeper to issues like identity, like sense of belonging, like who are we? Because if we have conflicts in our hands, especially in ongoing conflicts, people gather together, people congregate around less what they are and more around what they are not. And as long as they have an enemy, a danger, a threat, they hold their union together. But now you are done with the us versus them because you had a negotiation and you signed a peace agreement. Now you have to go deeper into who you are, how you built and sustain your collective identity without having an enemy on the other side. You have to go to the roots and start asking yourself why you went into this conflict in the first place, even centuries ago. Not just blame the other side for their existence. What made you choose to go to this conflict? These are very painful questions because they might touch upon and modify your identity, your preferences, the way you perceive of yourself, or the way you perceive of other, the way you perceive of relationship among you and other. And people who deal with dialogue in the stage of peace building must be very sensitive to these issues of who we are, what we believe in, i.e., religious people, religious, responsible religious leaders, as I mentioned before. So this is why when we move, when we are able to move, not in many cases we can do that because people are afraid to go deeper into the roots of the conflict. But if we manage to do that, I think that spiritual leaders, religious leaders, are the most appropriate people to deal with that. And this is the last part that I want to mention in my presentation. Not all religious people are fit to be good and reliable diplomats. And why not? And who are the most suitable ones and who are not? And here is when I want to bring forth a very interesting and very important distinction that I worked on, and I was inspired by my colleagues from Stanford University, Lee Ross and Byron Bland. And this is taken from two pillars, two really inspirational theoreticians, Carl Schmitt and René Girard. One dealt with politics and the other with religion. And both of them came with two distinctions. The political distinctions between friends and enemies, and the religious distinctions between holy and evil. When you take both of them and you juxtapose them, this is what you get. The horizon axis, the political, presents friends and enemies.
We should to come to the
Sorry?
end that we have. We should to come to the end that
Yes,
we
yes.
have time for questions. Thank you.
This is the last slide. The horizontal axis, the political, is the friends and enemies, and the vertical one, the religious, René Girard, between the holy and the evil. And my point is that only in the upper left box, friends and holy, and this is of course a perception, this is subjective, it's in the eye of the beholder. But religious leaders who are mostly capable of becoming reliable and sensitive diplomats and mediators and peacemakers are those who see the other as a friend politically and as holy as they are and not as evil. And this is taken back from Emil Durkheim. Only then the combination of those two attitudes produce an alliance and a mutual respect for the other, regardless of what religion they represent. All the other combinations would not make you responsibly and committed religious mediator in order to be an excellent diplomat. That's my point. Thank you.
We have 15 minutes for our discussion, which is not too long, but at least something. I would like to give you now the opportunity to ask our panelists. Before you ask, maybe I will have the first question, and then we have one question from Slido, because we didn't have so many questions from Slido from our internet audience. So all three of you actually call us for action. In diplomacy, George Fahimi said that ask the question how to translate into action the excellent document on human fraternity. Also here, Dr. Pelek even spoke about religious diplomats, which is for me, it sounds very interesting. So what could be the concrete steps of action? What could be done in the field of diplomacy, I ask, because we are the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to improve the relation and to improve the building trust between diplomacy and religion. His Excellency.
Yes, I was going to ask you the floor because the two colleagues that have took the floor were excellent, and I have some elements to complement their presentation. To our friend from Egypt, I just to tell you I'm working closely with the Human Fraternity Committee, the committee that was created after the historical visit of Pope Francis and Sheikh Imam or Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, Ahmed Tayeb. And I have to give you good news to see what is the next. The next is going to happen on the 7th of December. This Humanity Fraternity is coming to New York. We are going to be together with Secretary General of the United Nations. We will try to start to work out a kind of plan of action. And this plan of action have, as you mentioned, to take into consideration the two elements, of course, civil society, but also diplomats. Again, is what I said at the end of my intervention. You have to really gather everybody together in order they can really produce the results. So we need inspiration, the guiding role of His Holiness, the Pope Francis and Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, but then we need implementation phase. And so, Robert, we are working on that. The idea maybe is to have a big conference next year in order that we could put all the elements together, all the stakeholders together, in order that we can really. There is the idea to make a kind of youth meeting in order to discuss and to really get this fraternity document into action, into implementation. They have also, there are in the Humanity Fraternity Committee, there is already a rabbi, but some words and some voices from the Jewish community say that they have the Muslim representation, but they need a little more engagement from the Jewish side, so we are working on that. So, my dear friend, we are moving forward, and Alliance of Civilization have distributed the document to the 193 member states, so we are working very, very hard. And to our friend Peleg, I have to say, my dear friend Joseph Bailey is my friend, so I'm extremely happy to hear his comment. I have to say that I fully agree on the content of what he has said, but I have certain, let's say, question mark about some terminology. To be frank with all of you, I don't like the word security. Most probably I'm not politically correct. But what we have witnessed during the last 20 years, it has been an overuse of the word security. We practically didn't talk about peace. And well, everything was security, security, security. And then what has happened in Afghanistan shows that the security approach has failed. So I'm absolutely in agreement with Mr. Peleg of the columns between national security and human security, but I will prefer to call it human development. So I can go one paragraph to another. I fully agree on what he described. But this obsession about security, that's my opinion, no? So probably it's not a general opinion, but that fits better if we want really to achieve our common endeavor. I fully agree with his definition of dialogue, totally full agreement. And I have, at the end, when he concludes, he really mentioned what I'm trying to defend, alliance and mutual respect. How I'm not going to defend alliance. And mutual respect. And my friend Perek, don't use tolerance. Tolerance is a negative word. We have to start to work in a positive, new terminology. We have to work about citizenship, no minorities. Citizenship means rights, minorities negative. We have not to talk about coexistence, but living together. Living together, Spanish convivencia, is a positive concept. We have not to talk about security, we have to talk about peace. We have to talk about, human development, not human security. So that is the word. So we have to not to talk about tolerance, because I hate you, but I have to tolerate you. No. I respect you. So mutual respect, yes. Tolerance, no.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Dr. Fahimi, do you want to comment? Your mic is off.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
No, just briefly, I think what His Excellency said about the meeting in New York, I think that's great news, and I'll be following this and looking forward to see what will be the outcome. For example, on the relation between Muslims and Christians in the Middle East, which was the meeting between Pope Francis and Ahmed Taib, sent a very positive message to Christian communities after the experience of ISIS in Iraq, in Syria. Now there is a need to take one step further. As I mentioned in my presentation, words are amazing, but then the situation of Christian communities in the region won't be ameliorated by words. It will be ameliorated by laws, by strategies. So this is one thing, for example, that could be pushed for. Another thing is, I spoke about the case of Egypt, and you have a lot of Egyptian religious NGOs operating on the ground. The majority of Egyptian NGOs are religious, and they are very influential, and they have legitimacy within their local communities. However, the problem is that they don't work together. Every group is just serving his own community. One way of changing this is to kind of include them in the talks about human fraternity. So how can we translate this into civil society initiatives? How can they work together? How can we have joint projects? That would, I think, translate and carry these ideas of human fraternity to the local level, to Egyptians in Upper Egypt and Alexandria. So that would be my ideas.
Great, thank you very much. Dr. Pelek?
No, I wholeheartedly agree with what His Excellency just said. I mean, the importance of concept, the importance of words are very influential and very significant. And I definitely agree. I just want to mention that security was not my choice, but the authors that I was quoting. And with regard to coexistence, absolutely. I mean, a horse and a rider, they have coexistence, but one is here and one is there. And we definitely don't endorse this. On the contrary, we are at Oranim International School. We represent the Anna Lin Foundation in Israel. And we have 120 members, organizations from the Israeli civil society, Arab and Jews. And we are launching, with the help and the money of the Anna Lin Foundation, which is the European Union funds, we are launching a big initiative of shared society of Jews and Arabs in the Galilee. This is one of our main tasks. And I think the only, as I see, the only future of the Israeli society is shared society between Jews and Arabs, not coexistence, not reconciliation. These are just steps on the road to the ultimate goal of shared society, which is based on inclusion, on dignity, and on equality. This is where we're heading.
Quickly, I would like to ask you very short answers for difficult questions from Slido. Question to His Excellency Miguel Moratinos: is faith a reliable tool to rely on in diplomacy? Could faith potentially create even more problems if used in diplomacy? It's very provocative.
I mean, as we have said many times, every concept, every word can be a solution, can be a problem, depends how you tackle it. We need to understand, to know what kind of faith, how it has been projected, used, and so if you put the force of religion, of faith, in favor of peace, it could be an excellent and extremely positive instrument for peace negotiation. But again, I didn't respond to our friend Samuel Peleg, you know. I don't like to qualify diplomacy. There is only one diplomacy with capital D. It's to make peace through peaceful means. Full stop. There is no this economic diplomacy, there is no cultural diplomacy, there is no religious diplomat, no. A diplomat is the one who has the component and the multifaceted realities of society, and then make peace through a sincere dialogue, through the capacity to convince and to persuade your interlocutor mutually for the benefit of both. So that diplomacy, though, okay, we understand, and we say there is a cultural diplomacy. We're going to work on the religious cultural dimension of negotiation. It's part of the work. But diplomacy, diplomats, my dear, there's only one. I told my collaborator, I'm concerned because the Minister of Finance is taking part of diplomacy. And all these cultural affairs is taking part of the traditional diplomacy. He said, forget about that. You are the man or the woman that have the capacity to bring all together to solve the problem. So that is the role of foreign ministry, to be the one who gather all the instruments you have in order to produce a good result. So his faith is well understood. It can produce benefit. Much welcome. Let's
Thank you very much. We have just one question from the audience for all three panelists. Who would like to ask? Yeah, Professor. Okay.
Hello. Many thanks to the panelists again for the rich presentations. My question is addressed to the High Representative Moratinos. It has to do with a passage in your presentation where you talked about one of the main objectives of the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations is to bring religion to the agenda of the UN Security Council, of course on those issues that relate to religion. And I know that the UN Alliance of Civilization was founded in 2005, and 5 years later, in 2010, a UN task force on religion and development was established. And I'm just wondering whether there's a link between the UN AFC and that task force within the United Nations systems that can help bring that religion more to the front, or participants of religious communities to the front of a number of those issues at the United Nations Security Council. Thank you.
I really appreciate the question because I forgot to say that United Nations Alliance of Civilization, UNOSC, is the acronym. How many acronyms there are in the United Nations? We don't understand themselves, no? That's the reason people don't know what is the UN, because we are lost. So it's not an NGO. We are not trying to make a cultural or religious activities. We are a pure political instrument of the Secretary General to promote peace and prosperity in the Charter of United Nations. So we are a political instrument. And with this political instrument, we are trying to really influence member states, society, stakeholder to promote peace and prosperity. So, how to do so? If I know I cannot go to the Security Council, so the reason I'm planning to brief the Security Council, because the Security Council now is under review, is under reform, and is trying to really have a different, I'm referring to this concept of security, a much more larger concept of security. So they are going, Obama, after Ebola, called for a Security Council meeting in order to discuss the consequences of Ebola. Well, unfortunately, we took 4 months or even more to call the Security Council to discuss COVID-19. Can you imagine? Because it's putting the global security at risk. So it's not peace and war only. The concept of security has been enlarged, and the cultural religious elements are present. We are working with this network of faith-based organizations, religious leaders, very actively during COVID. We make a lot of things. But the most important task now we have, and I have as High Representative, is to really introduce in the reform process of UN that has been presented by Secretary General Guterres. They call our common agenda, the new common agenda of the UN for 2015. It's not the Agenda 2030 of the SDG, it's the new future of UN that has been just presented last September. Is how we introduce in the new UN, the UN of the future, this issue of cultural and religious dimension. It's a battle. I'm having a tremendous battle myself because I send papers, and if you read the common agenda, you refer, there are some reference on the narrative, many, but on the action, they don't take care about us. They think that we are
okay.
a lot about climate change, about gender issues, about digital and future, but about our discussion of today, for the moment, the bureaucracy of the UN has not been, but Secretary General told me, go ahead, fight for your engagement. And I'm going to fight. And we are going to succeed. Because it's not a question of personal, it's because the society are asking, are demanding that this issue have to be at the top of the agenda. And, well, you know, just, sorry. I mean, it's a paradox that in the political debate, these issues are at the top. I mean, parties are now going for election in Europe, and they don't discuss about pensions or about productivity. They are discussing about Islam or not Islam, about religion or not religion. They are the main concern. In the agenda, there is no program. Maybe energy, And then the culture and religion as well in the program. And then when we try to solve it in a peaceful way, they say, no, that issue should not be discussed.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I'm very sorry we are over the time. I would like to thank to all panelists. Thank you very much. I think the last words that it should be top on our agenda is very nice end of our panel. We thank to Egypt, to Israel, also to our both panelists online. Thank to you, and let me wish that the interfaith dialogue will be used more as a new tool of our diplomatic relations, and that we will be able to connect diplomacy and religion much more in the future years. Also, thanks to you and thanks to this conference. Thank you very much. you.